Hey, Steelers fans, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We got an emergency episode on the Steelers signing Robert Woods, wide receiver, to a one-year deal. I want to get my thoughts on that here real quick on this emergency episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content like this episode. Now, I'm going to say this is an emergency episode. I chose to do it this way, not because Robert Woods, I think, is going to be some game changer, but because I already recorded my Tuesday episode with Alan Saunders. It's a great episode. Go check that out when it comes out. It's going out right at midnight. So if you're seeing this episode or listening to this and you haven't heard that, you can watch or listen to that next. But I wanted to get my thoughts on here because we did a whole episode. It's a really good episode on the potential 2026 quarterback class, on the safety position, and on some Mike Tomlin debate that I think is going to be a fun episode for you to check out. But I wanted to talk about Robert Woods because I do have thoughts on this, and I thought it would be important to get out initial thoughts on this show, so that you guys know that it's not that I missed this, it's that I already recorded an episode and I didn't want to cut that up. So let's dig into what happened here. So the Steelers signed Robert Woods Monday afternoon, to a one-year deal, but it was $2.5 million, just a simple deal that's going to bring him into the organization, let him be in this receiver room. So what does this mean? What does this guy fit? And to me, this is not necessarily immediately about George Pickens or anyone else. This is particularly just they're bringing in some security because they did not address wide receiver the way they could have in this draft class. And that's with a guy that can line up in the slot or move around and gets natural separation in the middle part of the field, because that's not something that they got. Because if you remember, one guy I said that, a few guys that I said that they could target were Kyle Williams earlier in the draft or Konate Mumfield later in the draft, as just simple guys that can line up, get separation, win with good solid routes, just to give middle of the field options, while Pickens and Metcalf distract catch all the attention while they line up on the outsides. And so I think this move was in direct correlation with them not going and getting those guys. This is one of those things where when you don't address certain positions throughout the draft, certain guys are still in free agency, so they went and got Robert Woods for that. And again, I don't think Robert Woods is going to be some game changer for the Steelers. I think he's going to be a solid, Allen Robinson type veteran, comes in, not expected to light it up, but will be there as reliable hands and a reliable veteran to do the job of the receiver position should things, should he be needed to be called into duty. So that's what I really see Robert Woods as. I think it's also important, if you look back at his last few years, how he was used. There is that versatility that you can see there. Now, NFL.com's advanced statistics chart him as getting an average of 3.3 yards on the separations of his routes. That's pretty solid. That's tied with the likes of Garrett Wilson and Cooper Kupp. Granted, they are on a much larger sample size because they're number one receivers for their teams. But I think that's another sign of like, hey, he does a decent job running his routes. He's not going to come in and shake up the world, but he's going to give you a solid floor at wide receiver to protect yourself. And I think that's a big part of what's going on here for the Steelers as far as getting a guy like this is just, hey, we didn't add to the receiver room the way we wanted to in the draft because you only had so many draft picks and you had to make some good picks. I'm sure they're happy with their picks, but these are, some of the things there. But I also think there's an element to this Robert Woods signing that is an insurance policy, and it's a faceted insurance policy, because I do think that it's protecting the Steelers against a few things. For one, it does help with injuries because, whereas last year, you basically, if George Pickens went down, we knew the Steelers receivers were in trouble. If Pickens or Metcalf goes down, you go back to being at the status that you were last year, where it's like, oh man, you don't have that other receiver that you can trust to just help run your offense and run the right routes, because it's not just about being a great receiver. It's about being a detailed receiver that when we tell you to run the X route on X play, you're doing X route on X play because that structure is important to everything else the offense is doing. And I think that's where Robert Woods is coming into this and why that's such a big deal. But I also want to talk about why the other version of the insurance policy, and it's the player it could be an insurance policy for. And I think, again, there's multifaceted ways that they could address this. I'll address that in a second here, right on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with my emergency episode again. Short episode, not a long one. There's a full one, so understand that normally we don't do our breaks that early, but I'm splitting things up a little bit. Okay, so Robert Woods, I think, there's some people that are going to look at this and say, the classic Martavis Bryant meme when he posted when they drafted Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's like, that's who did he say? That's Sammy Coates' replacement, not mine. That's Marcus Wheaton's replacement, not mine. I forget which receiver it was, but it was a famous meme of when Martavis Bryant, when the Steelers drafted Juju Smith-Schuster, he said that that guy's not my replacement. Ultimately, he was, but that was just a funny internet moment that people always bring up. And there are some people that are probably going to make this joke about George Pickens. I don't think it necessarily is definitely his replacement, but I do think it gives the Steelers an out if they need to get there. Hear what I'm saying. I think that Robert Woods isn't going to be a game changer, but he's signing a 1-year deal to be a veteran presence for if the Steelers need him should the time come to replace something that is or isn't working. Now, George Pickens, as I said, going into the draft, I did not anticipate them to trade George Pickens. I thought it made the most sense not to trade him anymore because I do think there's a potential for him and DK Metcalf to be serious threats on the outside, aka the weapons of past destruction is the name that we've been giving them on our show, because I think they could be that dangerous of a duo. And I think the Steelers want to explore that. And I even think the Steelers might even explore the extension of a George Pickens because they're not going to be paying a quarterback top dollar, even if they draft a superstar quarterback next year in NFL's draft class. By the way, that's the topic of my episode with Alan for tomorrow. So go check that out if you want that topic. I look at George Pickens and I say the option to trade him is still there if the Steelers get the right value. And what I mean by the right value, I mean, well, the Cowboys were trying to trade for George Pickens during the draft class. Well, excuse me, that's an assumption. I'm not going to say that as a fact. But we did see reports that the Cowboys were in talks with an AFC North team for a veteran wide receiver to be traded for, and that it didn't work out. And a lot of the hints point towards that was probably George Pickens that they were looking at. And I still think the Steelers are probably like, hey, unless you cough up a second, we're not budging, because they know that if worse comes to worst and George Pickens plays one more year with the Steelers and they choose not to re-sign him and he has to hit the free agent market and you don't get a direct trade value for him, he's probably getting a big enough of a contract that you're going to get a third round comp pick for him. So if I'm the Steelers, I'm not budging on George Pickens for anything other than a second round pick, even better than that third round comp pick. And I don't even mean just a third round pick itself. I mean a second or a first round pick or a comparable player at another position. So I think that's where the Steelers are at here. But they didn't pull that trigger because I think the Cowboys weren't willing to give up that kind of compensation. However, I would not put it past the Steelers if during this upcoming season, those conversations pick up with other teams. Let's say the Steelers aren't in the mix. Let's say the Steelers are having a rough year, just isn't working out with Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph, and it looks like this ain't going to be the year for them to even make the playoffs. Then they say, all right, who wants George Pickens that's a serious contender and can get him on their roster for a year? And then you can create a sweepstakes. And Omar Khan often says this, that the key to the trade is making sure that there's two teams competing over a player, at least two teams. You want more if you can. But that's where things could get really interesting, is if the Steelers get to a point of next season where it's like, hey, someone's willing to trade a whole lot of compensation, and maybe you do end up with that second or even first round pick for George Pickens because someone's like, we have a chance to win now. Like, imagine if you're the Chiefs or the Bills, and not that you'd want to trade George Pickens to one of those teams, but so let's say you're the Eagles, or the Eagles got pretty good wide receivers, but You get what I'm saying? A good team that needs a serious threat at wide receiver, and they're thinking we will do whatever we can because if with him on our team, we become much more of a Super Bowl threat than we already are. And then maybe you can catch them being desperate. Again, the Steelers got the first pick of the second round for Chase Claypool. And let me tell you, after Chase Claypool's rookie season, there was no part of his game that looked like what George Pickens can do right now. So I look at this as an opportunity for the Steelers to be like, hey, we're putting this in place. Robert Woods, not that he's going to replace the production of George Pickens, but if they don't see what if they get in a position where there's an offer that they can't turn down at the wide receiver position, they have a veteran to help complete their roster at the wide or their depth chart at the wide receiver position ready to go. And I think that's what Robert Woods is. But I also think, again, multifaceted. It also provides them an opportunity for, hey, what if Roman Wilson don't work out this year? Because he didn't even play last season. He was injured, didn't work out. And so we still don't know what he's even going to look like this season. You hope he looks good. Calvin Austin's got 1 more year left. That's solid. But what if Roman Wilson doesn't work out? And then all of a sudden you're still with just those top 3 receivers, Pickens, Metcalf, and Austin. And then you're sitting there like, Ben Skoranek, that's a tough spot to be in. So now Robert Woods gives you another layer, another cushion of security in the wide receiver room where maybe he's not the insurance policy for if you want to trade away George Pickens. Maybe he's also the insurance policy for if Roman Wilson doesn't work out. And that way you just at least have a solid veteran NFL body to fill a position on your depth chart and run routes in different things so that you're not trying to grab some random guy off the street who doesn't have a job, or you're promoting some practice squad player that just is going to completely mess things up. Robert Woods will at least give you that floor. And I think that's the value that he brings there. His floor gives you an insurance policy for multiple directions. And to me, that is the bottom line of this signing. I don't think it's some grand move. Obviously not. It's a 1 year, $2.5 million deal. I don't think this is some, breaker. It's just a simple, hey, we're bringing this guy in. He's the Allen Robinson type replacement. He'll bring a veteran presence to the room to help further that. And this way, if Calvin Austin gets hurt or Roman Wilson gets hurt or if anything like that happens, we have a guy ready to fill in at a moment's notice, and he doesn't expect anything. He's just out there to do his job. That to me is what the Robert Woods signing is, and I think it's a solid move if that's what you're going for if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, with all that being said, that was this emergency podcast episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, I'm your host Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social media handles, all the same place at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including my Derek Harmon film study that released this past weekend. You want to see that? Go check that out at post-gazette.com. And you can find, just like you found this emergency episode, you can find all my full day episodes where we do a full 30-minute show on the Pittsburgh Steelers with the Locked On Steelers podcast. Same way you found this on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those daily episodes. We're back tomorrow with Alan Saunders here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.